Alright, welcome back to another web development video where I show you how to make modern websites using HTML5, CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. In this video, we are going to sort of take a deep dive into mobile navigation. So this is going to be a pretty basic mobile nav. There's going to be a menu button, which acts as our trigger. When the user clicks the menu button, menu is going to slide in from the right. I'll show you how to do right, left, top, bottom. Doesn't really matter what direction the menu is coming in from. You can easily manipulate that with CSS. So there's going to be a little bit of jQuery JavaScript at the end, but really it's only getting a class and then toggling the class on and off, essentially the active class, to make everything move. But most everything else is going to be done, the animations are going to be done with CSS, and let's just jump into it. So I'm going to start by creating a header element, and I'm just going to call this masthead. And then inside the masthead we're going to have a div called masthead inner. This is a common pattern for me. I like to use an inner class just so I can do a better job of containing some of the elements. It gives me the opportunity to use Flexbox and some different things, but also to have an outer wrapper element. So the masthead up here is going to be our outer wrapper, and then inside here we're going to sort of do all of our alignment and things like that. So inside of here we need a couple of different elements. We need a logo, or this could be could be called the site title, and then we're also going to need a nav trigger, and we're also going to need the actual navigation. So we'll just call it main nav. And so we have a site title, we have our navigation trigger, and then we have our main navigation. Now on certain screens, let's say above 600 pixels, I don't know what it would be, our navigation trigger is going to go away, and our main nav is going to sort of be the navigation at the top of the screen. So we're going to have a logo on the left, we'll have navigation on the right. On a small screen, all that we're going to see is the nav trigger on the right, and then this main navigation is actually going to be off the page over here. It's not going to be hidden, it's going to be off the page waiting to be brought onto the page. So that's how we're going to work it, and we have some nifty CSS3 properties that allow us to just sort of push things around the page without losing their place. So we're going to use that, and we'll make the necessary media queries at 600 pixels in order to get back to sort of a site logo navigation structure up here. But we're going to try to use the same navigation for our tall slide in menu as we use up here inside of our masthead for the larger sizes. So let's go ahead and create this element here. We're going to do an H1. We're just going to call it class of site title, and we'll just say site title here. I like to use, you can use anything for your nav trigger. I like to use a set of icon fonts called the Material Design Iconic font. And you can see the URL up here. You can see the name here. Let's see if it pulls it up. And it's based off of Material Design, so the Google Material Design icons, except it's an icon font. I like that inside of Codepen I can bring it in. So if I go to CSS and I just type in iconic, and a couple of different things going on. This one here, material design iconic font, and then I can just bring that right in, and then when I go over here and I pull in the images or pull in the icons, it's connected to Codepen. So I do like that part about it. You can also download it, or you can bring it into your project via a CDN like this. So it's got lots of different ways that you can bring it in. It's a font icon set, just like you would use with Font Awesome or something like that. And it's pretty extensive. It's got a lot of things to use. Here's the menu. So this is what it's going to look like at different sizes. All I have to do is copy this, come back, and I'm just going to give this a class of, we're going to call this a P with a class of menu trigger, and I'm just going to put that right in there like that, and you'll see it show up, I believe, over here. Oh, we don't have this on live, so let me change this from debug to live. Alright, so now we should see our changes updated as we make them, and you'll see our site title and our menu. You can see here. And then the last thing we want is to set up our main navigation. Now this is going to be an unordered list. I'm going to give it a class of main nav, and inside that I'm going to have a list item with a main nav item. That's what we'll call it. We'll just say item 1, and copy this down a couple times. And this will be 2, and this will be 3. Okay, so we have 3 navigation elements in here. We need to make those links. So let's go ahead and create links in here. So ahref equals #0. Sorry. And then, oh, need our, okay. So now we have 3 links, and they're inside of our main nav. You can see them here. And hopefully the internet goes a little bit faster than what it's doing now. And we have all of our elements. So this is essentially what we're going to need. Now we need to jump into the CSS. So I'm just going to pull the CSS pane over like this so we can see it. If you're not familiar with Codepen, then you can always change your view here where you have the code on the left, and it's sort of set up like this where the code is on the left and the preview is on the right. So you can always do it that way. I thought I would try just putting the preview out here so we can see all the code side by side. Might be easier for everybody to see. So let me just go through here and do some things. So first we're going to start with the masthead. And I'm just going to give the masthead a little bit of color, just so that we can see everything that's going on with it. Background color of E, which is going to be a very light gray. Maybe too light. And let's try D. Okay, so we have that. And let's go down to this gap here is caused because of this. H1 element has a margin, and it's pushing everything down. So this is the margin on the top. I like to zero out the margin and the padding on all of my elements. So that is a helpful thing to do. So we're going to just say do them each individually, site title, is going to be margin of 0. And then that should get rid of our space at the top. And then I also want to go to my menu trigger. And I want to make sure that I do a margin of 0 on there too. And I want to do the same for my main nav. I want to make sure that the margin is margin of 0 and padding of 0. So I just want to sort of zero out all of the elements that are in my masthead here. Not sure why the internet is running quite so slow today. Okay, well, it comes back. There you go. So you can see that all of the spacing, the padding, everything is sort of removed from all of these elements. The next thing we want to do is come to our masthead inner, and we want to use Flexbox in order to get our site title over here and to get our menu and our trigger over here. So let's go to masthead inner, and we'll just say display flex. You could also use display grid here. Either one is fine and acceptable, but we're going to go with display flex, and you can see that that flexes everything. I want to justify the content to space between, and once we make this element a fixed width, then we're going to be left with our site title here, and we're going to be left with our menu over here, which is exactly the sort of setup that we want. But right now it's spacing all the elements, right? So because there are 3 of them, this masthead inner is our flex parent, and we have 1, 2, 3 children. Sorry, this one is a child, and we have 3 children, and it's spacing them all out evenly. So it's putting the first one at the far left, it's putting the last element at the far right, which is what space between means, and then it's evenly spacing everything in between. So if we had 7 elements, it would evenly space all the elements in between, and then push the first one to the left, push the last one to the right, and that's how space between works. We also want to put a little bit of padding here. So, you know, 0.5 is okay, or you could do padding of 1. Either one of those is more than acceptable. It just depends on how much space you want to take up here at the top of your screen. I typically like to go with 1. 0.5 is 8 pixels. That feels a little bit cramped for me a lot whenever I'm doing website designs. Even on a small mobile screen, 1 rem is usually okay. It's not too much padding. So this is a nice amount here. Let's go back to our site title. I want to make that size a little bit smaller, so 1.5 rem is going to bring that down a little bit. And I want to go to my menu trigger, and I want to make that the same size. So we're going to bring the font size down a little bit, and we're going to bring the menu trigger size up a little bit. So now they're almost equal. It probably would look okay even to have that as a 1 rem, which should, in proportion, the site title would be a little bit bigger, the menu would be a little bit smaller, or the menu trigger. And we need to come down and style our navigation. I want to get rid of the list items, or the list bullets, so we say list style of none, and that should get rid of our bullets. Okay, I still like this at 1.5 rem, so we'll do that as well. We need to make sure that we style our navigation here, our main nav. So I'm going to make that position of fixed. Now you could do fixed, or you could do absolute, either one. I prefer fixed because it is going to be fixed on the page. It's not, if you do absolute, it's going to, as soon as you scroll, it's going to make that go up the page. So it's going to effectively keep you from being able to use it unless you scroll to the top of the page. So we'll say position fixed, and we'll say top of 0, and we'll say we're going to put it to the right, and so right is going to be 0, and the width I want to put at about 60 viewport widths. And you can see now that the background is transparent, but we need to be able to separate it from these elements. So we need a background on it as well. And it needs to be, I'm just going to say a background of sort of a really dark gray, light black. We're going to make the color white, which is going to be the color of the text. And then we're going to might have to change that. Might have to go down to the A level element and change it. Let's do that. We'll have to fix that. And then what else do we want to do to it? So you can see here it's 60% essentially of the viewport width, and it will always be that. So it sort of moves and always only takes up 60 out of 100% of the space. It takes up 60% of the viewport width. It's not as tall as we want it to be, so we need to add a height. And the height, I always want it to just sort of take up all of the viewport height here. So we're just going to leave it there at 100. So that it means it takes up 100% of the space, whatever the viewport height is. Okay, which is going to change per device typically. So and then we're going to go to our main nav items, and we're going to say main nav item is going to be a margin of 1 rem on the top and 0 on the right, 0 on the bottom. No, we'll do 1 rem on the bottom and 1 rem from the left. So that'll set it off a little bit where there's space in between each of these elements, but there's also space to the left. And then the last thing we need to style is the main nav item A, and that's going to be, that's where we'll put our color of white, and we'll say text text decoration of none, and that should style our link elements with no text decoration, and they should be color white, and there should be some space. There's space on the left, the top, the bottom, and nothing, no space on the right. Okay, so this is the basics of our slide-in navigation element. Now I'm going to show you sort of the trick that makes this work, and it's a CSS property called transform. So we say transform, and transform has lots of different things that we can do. We can scale things, we can rotate them, we can move them all over the page. And the beauty of this is that it sort of keeps everything, if this is relatively positioned, you can still move items around without making them fixed or absolute positioned. But we are going to go ahead and take our fixed position element because we want it to be on the page. Even if the user is scrolling, we want it to be on the same part of the viewport. So that's what we're doing. And we're going to say translate, and we want to translate across the x-axis, so horizontally. We want to translate x, and we want it to go, let's say 100%. So 100% of this item, of this element, so whatever width that is, 60 viewport widths, it's going to translate to the right, because it's 100, a positive 100. So to the right, it's going to translate, it's going to push it 100% to the right. And you're going to see it go off the page, and all we're going to be left with is here, right? So if we made this 50%, you'll be able to see how it works. So it's at 50%, it's taking whatever width this element is, and it's pushing it half the amount of that width to the right. So when we say it's pushing it 100%, we're taking the full thing, the full element, and we're pushing it that amount to the right. Okay, so right now it's only going half of that element's width to the right. So that's going to give us completely off the screen, but it's just off the screen. If you want to make sure, sometimes I will put a drop shadow on it, and so I want to make sure that the drop shadow gets covered too, and it's going to be sticking out a little bit to the left. So I want to push it 125%. So a little bit extra, so a little bit off the page, but it doesn't really change anything necessarily. And you can see, you know, I'm trying to scroll and not able to scroll off the page or anything. So this is how we move an element using CSS, and we can translate things by X or Y. If you want this to slide in from the top to the bottom, then you would just translate this Y and then maybe minus 125, so it pushes it up. If you want to slide in from the bottom to the top, you would say translate Y 125%, and then that will push it all the way down 125% of the element's height, all the way down below the page, below the viewport. If you wanted to come in from the left side, then you would say, you know, minus however much you want it to move. So we've attached it to the right side of the viewport. You can see that we moved it 125% to the left. Okay, so you see how that works, but it's stuck over here at 0%. So we've moved it this way. So on the x-axis, minus means to the left, plus is going to mean to the right. On the y-axis, minus means going up, and positive means going down, right? All right, so that is how we get our navigation off the page. Now, what we want to do is when we click this trigger, we want something to come in. And what we want really is for our main navigation to just come back to its starting point. So we have pushed it to the right 125%, but what we want it to do really is to just come back to, we want it to come back to the 0 position. So if we do translate x of 0, then that's going to put it back to its original position. So we want to move it from where it was at 125% to 0. And the way that we're going to do that is we're just going to do a simple add remove of a class, and that class is going to be called active. So main nav.active, we're going to take that transform, and we're going to translate back to 0. So I'll show you by manually adding the class of active. So right now it's translated off the page, but if I go into our main nav and I add the class of active, then you're going to see how it comes back onto the page, and it translates back to 0. So now it's active and it's back to 0. So there's no need to even hide this element from the page. There's no hide and show or anything like that. It's merely moving it from one place to the other right off the page. So I'll go over how it animates and using CSS transitions once we get everything set up for bringing it back onto the page. This is pretty much where we are right now, and we need to move into the JavaScript. So when we click this menu trigger, we want to add a class of active to the main nav, and when we do that, it's going to set it back to its original position out here. So let's open up our JavaScript, and I'm just writing in jQuery. It's easy for me. If you don't know jQuery, then you can just do a simple, get element by ID or a query selector to get the element, and then we're just simply adding a class, changing the class, adding a class to another element. So this is pretty basic, even vanilla JavaScript. But we're going to get our menu trigger, and when the menu trigger is clicked, so on click, then we're going to do something. And what we want to do is we want to take the main nav, and we just want to simply add the class of active. Okay. And that's really all of the JavaScript that we need in order to make the trigger actually work. So when we click on here, you can see that it gives us the active, it puts the active class on here. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a break from the JavaScript for a second. And whenever we clicked our menu trigger up here, you can see how fast it comes in. Look how fast it just pops right into place. And what we want is to have a smooth transition from off the page to on the page. And the way that we can do that is we can say transition. This is a CSS property that sort of helps with, it's kind of a low-level keyframe animation property. So when we're moving an element from one place to another, or we're positioning it, or we're changing the width, or even changing margins and padding, background colors, color, border. Anytime you're making a change from one state to another on an element, you can use the transition to determine how quickly it transitions, let's say from 50% tall to 100% tall. So you can decide how much time, and it's sort of a low-level animation property. And I'll show you how it works here. So what we're going to be concerned with is the transform. So our element here is going from translate x 125% to translate x of 0. And so in order to ease that transformation between those two values, we're going to use, we're going to focus our transition on the transform. So we want to transition this transform property. So you're looking at the property, not the value. So we want to transform, and we want it to happen over, let's say, 500 milliseconds, which is half of 1 second. And then we also want to use ease. I'm just going to use ease, but ease is the same as ease in out. So if you're familiar with CSS animations at all, it eases in and it eases out. So it sort of starts slowly and picks up speed, and then when it gets toward the end, it sort of slows down, sort of like you would do if you're running, right? You don't run, your first step is not at full speed, so it takes you a minute to get to full speed, and then you also don't just stop. You gradually slow down until you come to a stop. So ease in, ease out is gradually starting, gradually finishing, and gives it just a nice finish to the animation. But if we just use ease, that is the same thing as ease in, ease out. You could also do ease in, or you could do ease out. You can use your own custom animations using cubic Bezier. So there's all kinds of different things that you can do once you get into the CSS animation space. And I have maybe a couple of videos on my channel talking about CSS animation. There's a great one on the Dev Tips for Designers YouTube channel. Travis Nielsen, who started that channel, he did a great CSS animations series, 4 or 5 different episodes where he talks about, you know, what does everything mean. He shows you, you know, this is what the different functions are and what you can use. So I learned a lot early on by watching him. And you could even theoretically do keyframe animations here, so you're doing some different funky things with opacity and some different other things. So, but we're just going to do sort of a low-level animation. This is a catch-all, just sort of rough and tumble. You can use it for any website or app, mobile navigation. So now we are transitioning our transform property over 500 milliseconds, and it's going to ease in and ease out. And you can see, you'll be able to see the difference, how much smoother it is from coming off the page to coming back into position. So let's just save that. And when it loads, we'll try it again. So let's see. And so now you can see it's way smoother than it was before. That's a lot smoother transition than it was whenever we did it just a minute ago. So let's try it again. So you can see, and if we change this, let's say to 1,000 milliseconds, it's going to be too slow for a mobile navigation menu. You can see it's creeping into the page, but it just allows you to see how you can manipulate how quickly the element comes onto the page, just by manipulating this number here, by making it smaller. Smaller is faster, larger is slower. I'm going to stick with 500, although 400 might be a little bit better. I'm not sure. Definitely getting a slow internet today. That's really weird. Could be my machine, don't know. So let's see, about 400. Okay, so that's a little bit better. And I'm actually going to come in and add a little bit of a shadow just here on the left hand edge, just to sort of separate it from the page. I don't want to go too crazy with it. So we'll say along the x-axis, that's the first value, we're going to say -3 pixels. And along the y-axis, we don't need that because you're not going to be able to see it down here anyway. So 0 pixels. We'll make the blur maybe 20 pixels, and we'll make the spread 1. And then I usually like to do an RGBA color, but I'm just going to go with something super light and see if we can get away with that. Okay, that's not going to work very well. So let's just inspect it. And it's our CSS. What I want to do is I want to make this a black, and then I wanted to give it an opacity of, let's say, I'm looking at it right here to see what might be good and appropriate. You know, maybe something like that. And then I'm just going to copy this. So this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zeros, which is the color black. And then it's got this little extra tag on it. So now it's 8 numbers instead of, or 8 characters instead of 6, like a traditional hex value. And those last 2 characters are going to give us this opacity. So if you ever want to find that, you can go into your dev tools, click on the color picker, and then you can go through and choose, this is the opacity or the alpha channel, and you can sort of slide that and see in real time what it's going to look like. And then all you have to do is copy that, and then I'm just going to come in and I'm going to paste it right here. Now I'm going to save it. And because we're using vanilla CSS, and we're not using any Sass or anything like that, we can't just do the RGBA method. That's what I typically use. But if you're just writing vanilla CSS, you can still use alpha and opacity. You can see here that we get, even after it refreshes, we get our alpha and opacity here. Okay. So a little the little things that are being added to CSS and little things that are being added all along help us to sort of move off of frameworks and that type of thing and just use the vanilla stuff. The dev tools are a great addition. You need to be able to use the dev tools in whatever browser you're using. Alright, so great. We have a menu. We can click on these things, but it doesn't do anything because there's no links connected. And now we don't have any way to close this. So I'm going to show you a little tip that I typically do. So normally when there's no, you could put an X up here so that when someone clicks on it, then it goes away. Typically, especially on a mobile device, people are either going to swipe or they're going to try to click over here outside of this element in order to make it go away. Now you can use JavaScript to register any clicks that are outside of this element and then take that active class off of it. Because once we remove the active class, because we still have this transition on the transform, now it's going to transition from translate x0 back to 125%. So adding and removing the active class still triggers the animation because it's based off of the transform property. So that's what we're sort of going to use in our favor. I'm going to show you what I typically like to do, which is I like to come into just before the main navigation, and I like to add an overlay. So we're just going to put in a little div right there. It's an empty div. No, we don't need to put anything in it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and let's style our overlay. And you can, this is where you can use CSS sort of in your favor. So everything at the top of the, or HTML, everything at the top of the page is rendered first. So it's set down on the page essentially first. And then everything before that is above it. If you think in spatial terms, everything is above it. So if any of these elements overlaps, the bottom one is going to overlap the one ahead of it and all the way up. So everything is sort of sitting on top of, if you want it to. If you position all of these absolute, the last thing that you would see is main nav, because that's sort of, in terms of the Z index and the depth of the page, it's the top because it's being rendered last. So you can use those things to your advantage, where you don't have to do a lot of Z index in the CSS because you've already thought about where do those elements exist inside the HTML. So if we put our overlay above, or if we put it above masthead inner and we put it below the main nav is still going to take precedence. It's going to be sort of in front. If you think of an image editing program where you bring to front or you send to back, it's going to be the foremost layer. It's going to be, and so if overlay and main nav are both position fixed, then main nav is going to be over top of overlay. Okay, so we'll use that to our advantage, and we'll say also position fixed, and we'll say top of 0. So similar, very similar to what we're doing up here. We want to set it from the left, so we want it to start the top left of the viewport, and then we want its width to be 100%, and we want its height to be 100 viewport heights. Just trust me on this. If you do 100%, then it's going to stop and sort of take it'll take the scroll bar and things into account. If you do 100 viewport widths, it'll actually push it a little bit off the page. So I like to just do 100% wide, 100 viewport heights tall. And we want the background color to also be this sort of opacity background color. That's what we're going to do. We'll have to look in our dev tools and sort of manipulate that to make sure that we can get it, because right now it's just going to be an opaque color. Not what we want. We want it to have some alpha transparency so that we can see what's underneath. So if we go to our element, which is our overlay, in our dev tools, we click on that and we can start to manipulate or bring this opacity down. Well, it's going to let us. So let's bring that opacity down, and you can see now we're seeing a little bit more of the background. That's a 0 opacity. That's full opacity. So let's do something like let's just do it a little bit, because the problem is our main nav over here is a dark black, so we don't want like a black menu over top of a totally darkened background. So we'll just a little bit lighter, maybe something like that, and we'll just see how that looks. So let's put that in here as our overlay opacity. So it's a black color, but it has an opacity of, I don't know if that's 0.6 or, it's something in the middle range. Right now we're not going to be able to click on our menu trigger. I'm trying to click it now. The problem is that our overlay is now, it's a layer over top of this right here. So the way I've traditionally dealt with the overlay is just to say display of none, and then that keeps it from displaying when the page is loaded. So you'll see that the overlay is not there anymore, and when we click on our nav trigger, it triggers it back in. Okay, so the goal here is to, when we click on the nav trigger, to slide this in. We also want the overlay to show in between our masthead here, our page content. We want it to show in between, so where the shadow area is, we want it to be in between. So if you think about layers, this will be the top layer, the overlay will be the middle layer, and then our main content is going to be the bottom layer. And so we'll have this overlay that sort of helps our menu to stand out, and it also, and more importantly, gives us a space when we click the overlay. Then we can take this element, remove the active class, and push it back. And when we click the overlay, we'll get rid of the overlay, we'll get rid of this, and then users will be able to just easily click outside here. Sometimes when you use the JavaScript to register clicks out here, it can really bother and mess with other things that you don't want to happen. It's an overly complicated way to get the element off the page. This feels to me like a very simple way and a stylish way, because it sets off the menu from the background. We've done that a little bit with the box shadow, but if there were no shadow, or you just wanted something a little flatter, this really helps to set everything apart. So let us go back to our JavaScript. So when the page is loaded, our overlay is not going to show. And so when we click the menu trigger, we also want to set the overlay, and we can just use a jQuery method called show. And essentially show just takes something that's hidden and make sure that it's visible on the page. So when we click on it, you can see that our our overlay shows and our navigation comes in. Now I don't like how quickly it comes in, so I'm just going to do a simple fade. So we're going to fade in and we'll just match. It takes us 500, let's see, where is it? It takes us 500 or 400 milliseconds here, and so we'll just match that 400 milliseconds. So it's going to take 400 milliseconds for this overlay to fade in. It's going to take 400 milliseconds for our menu to come in. So we'll sort of match those up, and you could offset those where the fade comes quicker or comes slower, you know, whatever you want to do. But you can see now, well, that wasn't very good. Okay, so now it sort of fades in and comes in at the same time. And then now we have this option here to, when we click on overlay, that we can slide this back out. We can get rid of overlay. So we come back into our jQuery, we say overlay. When we click on overlay, we want to do something. And what do we want to do? We want to take the main nav, and instead of adding a class of active, we want to remove the class of active. And we also want to take this overlay and we want to fade it out. So you can merely say this because someone has clicked the overlay, so overlay is this, and then we say fade out, and then the same 400 milliseconds. You could just as easily say, you know, overlay here as well if you wanted to. I'll just stick with this. So we get it here over here to test, and we click here, brings everything in. When we click on our menu, I'm clicking on my menu right now, nothing's happening, but when I click overlay, then it does exactly this function here. So when we click on menu, it doesn't do anything. When we click on overlay, everything goes away. So this is just a nice, easy way to give the user a way to do something that actually feels kind of natural. This is how we typically dismiss modals, and we dismiss any element that doesn't have an explicit trigger or X. Someone's either going to try to swipe this or they're going to try to click this overlay. If you want to add a swipe, there's a I like to use something called touchswipe.js, and it listens for, it's really small, it listens for swipes and pinches. You can do multiple fingers, like if it's a 2-finger swipe in order to close it, or 1 finger, or you can determine how far they need to swipe in order to close it. So it's a nice little JavaScript jQuery plugin that you can use for mobile friendly sites. And if you just need something super basic, you know, this is going to be a super basic way adding that overlay. And you can see, you know, it's just one tiny div, and that's not going to add a lot of weight to your page. So it's not a cumbersome sort of thing. Everything is happening with the overlay. Almost everything is happening through CSS and HTML, so provides a nice smooth transition for you. And we can set it so that when one of these items is clicked, then the same thing happens. So we want this same thing to happen here. We could even create a function out of this, these two things here, that says, you know, menu out or something like that is the function. And so anytime we do something where we want the menu to go away, like if we click one of these items, we don't want the menu to stay, we want all this to go away and then go to wherever the item says to go. So we can make this into a function if we wanted to, if we're going to use it over and over and over again. Right now, let's just do a quick and dirty thing, which is the main nav item. And when we click on, so we can sort of chain these in jQuery. because we want the same thing to happen whether we click overlay or whether we click the main nav item. So the way we do that, we just add a comma and then we put the other class. So if you click on this class, then it does this thing. If you click on this class, it does the same thing. So if we look here, our overlay still works. And if we click on one of these items, oh, that's when you're going to run into problems. We need this overlay here. Because now this turns into the main nav item, so we can't use this anymore. We need to use overlay and make it explicit which element that we want to fade out. Because this could be overlay, this could be main nav item. So we just have to be careful of that. So when we click overlay, it's good. And we go to item 1, same thing. If we go to item 2, same thing. And we go click on item 3, then we have the same thing happen. Okay, so this is just sort of a deep dive into a super basic mobile navigation. And I wanted to show you also how we would go about making sure, because you can see here that you start to get into this is like a tablet size. So let's say we want to go as far as this, but at 500, maybe 600. At 600 pixels, we really don't want this mobile navigation anymore. We want to have just sort of a traditional navigation at the top opposite of our site title. So what we need to do is we need to kind of come and undo everything that we've done up to this point. So it's going to take a little bit of time, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to say the menu trigger. So at media, and at a minimum width of 600 pixels, we want to do something. And we want to take this menu trigger and we want to set it to display none. So we want this to be display none. And we are at 600 pixels right now, so this should update and not show the menu trigger anymore, because when we get to the minimum width of 600 pixels, then menu trigger is just going to go, it should go away. Okay. Although it's not. Let's see, menu trigger, display none. Alright, I'm not digging the live update, so let's just go back to the debug mode. Okay. Alright, so now you can see when we reach so 598, 600, it goes away. So you can see right there, it goes away. And then now there's no way to trigger our main nav is still over here, and so there's no way to trigger it back onto the page. So what we need to do is we need to sort of get it back on the page. We need to restyle it so that it's positioned relative back into its original position, because it's part of this masthead inner, right? So when we don't have this menu trigger, all we have is this main nav, and it should sit over to the right, because remember we have it space between. So we're going to come down to here and we'll say at media and the minimum width is going to be 600 pixels. So the same thing, when our trigger goes away, our navigation needs to change. So we are going to say main nav, and position is going to be actually let's go with static. Static is the original of what it should be. And we're going to make sure that we actually let's just copy this. We're going to transform it back to where it needs to go, which is its original place in the code. Okay, so now it's being transformed. You can see it's inside the gray area, and it's pushing everything down because we have an explicit height on there. So we just sort of have to undo all the things that we did before, and we need to make this height auto. Okay, so now our element is sitting it's sitting inside. Let's see if we can redo that. Okay, so it's sitting inside of our masthead element, and we need to get rid of the box shadow. So box shadow of none, and we can see that the shadow goes away and we just have our flat element. We need to get rid of our background. So the background color we can just set to transparent, and you can see that the background will go away. We need to reset these items, reset their color, so we'll do that in a minute. We also have a width here. We need to set the width to auto as well. So the height and the width are both going to be set to autos. That means it only takes up as much space as it needs to take up. So it should set it somewhere over here. Yep. So it's only taking up the amount of space that the words and spacing take up. And what else do we have? Let's go ahead and set it to display flex so that we have each item in a row horizontally. And so let's say display of flex, and then we can do text align to the right. That way it's on the right side of the page and we anticipate it staying to the right, so we'll just sort of push everything over to the right side of the page. Okay. We're still getting some funky things here because remember we have some margin and padding there, and if we just go ahead and zero out the margin and zero out the padding. Oh, I'm sorry, it's on our main nav item, so we don't need to do anything with that, but each item has its own margin here, and so we're going to have to get rid of that because you can see that everything is not necessarily lined up the way we want it to be. And for our display flex, we want to align, no. Did we do that before? Okay. We didn't necessarily need that here before, but we're going to do that anyway. We're going to say align the items to the center, and what that's going to do is it's going to take all of our items and it's going to align them vertically along the center. You can see that this is sort of at the top here, but it's going to bring this down to where it's centered with the center of this item here. You can see it move, so now it's not set to the top, which is flex start, which is the default. It's set to the center of the other elements that it's flexed with. So these are our only flex children right now because we are not displaying the menu trigger. But if the menu trigger were there too, it would also be sitting vertically centered, and we do that on our masthead inner, our main outer flex container. Sorry. Okay, we're almost there. We need to come down and do a media query for our main nav item. So we just need to get rid of this margin here. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it in here, and we're just going to say a margin of 0. Because we don't need the margin on the top and bottom. We want a nice uniform 1 pixel all around. Okay, so you can see that happening there. And then we also want to make sure that there is a space to the left of each of these items. Now you can put space around them, or you can put space just on one side. I like to choose one side. So we'll say margin top 0, right 0, bottom 0, and then one rim on the left. So we're going back and we're sort of refining our spacing between our list item elements. And so now each of these has a margin to the left. It separates them out a little bit. And you can see that when we get to this space here, it comes right to what we want it to be, right? So on a mobile size, it's like this, and then tablet, it's going to reestablish itself here, like this. Let's see, what do we have? Okay, we have the viewport meta tag. It should be doing better than it's doing. These things shouldn't be quite so small. Okay, and then the last one is we need to change this main nav item A, and we need to make it a darker color because that white on the light gray is not a good look. When you're doing web design and web development, you need to always remember the text needs to be readable. So let's just give it 444. We don't need the text decoration none because that's going to be carried over from here. And let's just go ahead and set that up. So now it's a dark color. We can see. And now we have our site title over here. We have our menu items over here. When we click them, it's still going to run this function. Sorry. You could make this function so that when do an if then statement, if else statement, and whenever the screen size, the width of the screen is larger than 600 pixels or 600 pixels and above, that this does not run. But right now you can see, let's see, does it have it? Let's see if it runs it. So overlay in main nav item, it should add a class of active here. Oh, but it's not running it, so that's good. So it's a little bit more performant because it's not running that JavaScript and adding the class of main nav. It's giving us an error here though. So maybe it's gonna, maybe there's just an error, so it wasn't running any of the JavaScript. So let's see if when we click on these items that it triggers something. Yeah, still not triggering anything, so that's good. So our overlay is being shown, but it's only there for when the width is 600 pixels or less than 600 pixels. So pretty good. And now we just have our regular site. So when the site is however large it's going to be, even on a large one, you know, we have our traditional menu item with our logo. But when we come down to a mobile size, now we have our mobile menu. So you can see how it changes over time, right? So this is sort of a deep dive into a mobile navigation, and hopefully this is really helpful to you to just sort of understand how we can manipulate a mobile navigation with just super basic elements. You know, this is not This is not a ton of JavaScript, less than 10 lines of JavaScript. And this is jQuery. You could do it just as easily with JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript. This is not a difficult thing to do with JavaScript. So you can feel free to adapt that as you need. But it gives us a lot of flexibility because it's one HTML structure that can be used over any screen size. So that is a huge advantage. You're not having to create either a new website or new elements. You're merely manipulating the size, the shape, the positioning of the main navigation, and we're simply triggering those on and off the page using a basic class, a CSS class. And then these elements, when they're display none, they don't show, they don't get output to the page. So there's not a big hit there. If you wanted to make this a hidden element and just set it to set this to hidden like this, then that would actually, it wouldn't even be rendered to the page. So you can choose that if you want to do that as well. So hopefully this makes sense to you. If there are things that I've covered that don't make very much sense to you, then leave a comment or a question down in the comment section below. I'm planning to do a few more of these sort of deep dives into common things that you just need to know how to do as a front-end web developer. So if you're working or you're moving toward doing that, or you need to do that more for your job, hopefully creating these basic elements, I show you enough variation that you could do the things that you need to do in order to make it come in or do what you need it to do specifically for your project. But essentially we want to be able to understand how to trigger things, how to make things move, how to make things responsive. How can we create these modern looking websites using the tools that we have today and we have available cross-platform to be able to make the best sites that we can for as many people as we can. And hopefully this is a part of your education, and there are lots of other good places to go to find more in-depth information, or if you want me to cover something more in-depth, you can leave that in the comments section below too. Make sure you go through my YouTube channel first before you make those suggestions, because I've got a couple hundred videos here, so maybe I've already covered something that you have a question about. So I encourage you to just sort of look through my playlist, see if there's something that fits the bill, or just do a search on my channel and see if there's a video already that covers your specific question. And if not, I'm happy to make a video for that. Subscribe to my channel, and then you'll get notifications of new videos when they come out. And I usually do 1 or 2 a week on average, sometimes more, sometimes less. And I'm pretty focused on this series, and there's quite a few things that I want to do, so the videos might be coming a little bit more readily because I already know where I'm going and what I'm going to do. So I would expect a little bit more frequency over the next couple weeks probably. And you can also connect with me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Brian, B-R-I-A-N, Haferkamp, my last name, Haferkamp. You can follow me on Codepen. Feel free to come on to Codepen. I'm going to put I'll put the links into the video description so that you can go back and you can see exactly what I'm doing and try to manipulate it, maybe even make changes, fork it, make changes to the different values. You can use the code directly, it's fine. Feel free to take it and use this as a menu. I use this menu on most of the projects that I do for my company. So this is something that works, and people use it every day. So it's maybe not bulletproof, but it's certainly something that works and is in the wild, and thousands of people use it every day. So you can trust that this code is good. And all right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.